for your classmates who are not able to join us today and get right back into it. So let's pick it up where we left off on Wednesday of last week. We were practicing writing some theme statements. The assignment was to have 3 theme statements on topics of your choice in kind of a draft 1 format, and with the clear understanding that you're not going to be graded harshly on those at all, in the sense of it is truly a draft 1 thing. Most of us have not ever really had a chance to engage with this kind of writing. So this is a little bit like being asked to write your very first lab report at a college level, having never taken a science class before. So we want to do what's called chunking in the education field. That is, taking a complex and difficult task of interpretation, which is huge, bring it down into not particularly intimidating or stressful, tiny little chunks, writing 1 sentence and being pretty satisfied with that progress for the moment, So go ahead and pull those out if you have them on paper. If not, pull them up on your phone if they're digital. And we'll get into our thing for today. So just kind of reflection as folks are pulling stuff out. How did this assignment go? It's like Dr. Parker's kind of slow rolling out the beginning of the semester. We're in week 3 now. We're writing our first 3 sentences. That's great, So how'd it go? Is it all right?
I'm not the best at writing directly. I kind of have a lot of muddle in my writing.
Okay.
So it's kind of hard to, first of all, avoid all those verbs, and then also make it concise enough to fit in one sentence.
Yeah, that is tough. Yeah. It is, there's an old joke among professional speech communicators like pastors or politicians, stuff like that. If you want a long, rambly message, give me 10 minutes to kind of get my thoughts together, and I'll just talk at you for a while. If you need something that's sort of concise and clever and to the point, give me a couple of months, right? And there's some truth to that. Like, it's easy, if any of you guys and gals have a friend who's kind of an external processor, so they get to their point or they get to their decision by talking it through with you, through a lot of words. You understand that process of revision, necessarily means that lots of words don't necessarily mean high quality or high value. And for those of you who are very strong introverts, who tend to edit your statements quite a bit mentally before speaking a single word, that process of editing can feel very important to you and stressful when it's not possible. So teachers, professors are trained to, in a room of mixed company, of which some folks will be introverts, to set out a question for the group, if you're going to ask the group a question to be answered in front of the group, well before you're actually expecting an answer from anybody, so that the introverts in the room can have a chance to think and arrive at precisely that correct 1-sentence answer that they want to say, and so forth. So we are doing exactly that process in slightly elongated form with this process of theme writing. So with that preamble, let's go around the room and hear a couple of examples. So pick your second or third. I guess we shared most of the first sentences at the end of last class. Is that correct? Am I remembering that correctly? Okay. Pick your second or third sentence and read it out to the class. We won't editorialize or anything. Just want to hear how it's going, get a sense of where everybody's at. Anybody prefer to start? Otherwise, we can just kind of roll around the room. Okay. Hey, go ahead and pull out your 3 theme sentences. And any other volunteers? Otherwise, we're just gonna start in front and walk around.
I guess I'll start.
All right.
Because I'll probably start either way.
Rock and roll.
So I have exploring how climbing outdoors improves your mental health.
Okay. exploring how climbing outdoors improves your mental health. I like it. Cool. I have a pretty clear sense of how we'd spend the next hour or half hour or whatever. I like it. Okay.
Kind of structured more like I was talking to people.
Okay.
And I said like, my theme is best rocks to hunt for in the Midwest. So I said I love hunting rocks, and today we get to dive into the practices surrounding what can be found, the practices surrounding and what can be found rock hunting in the Midwest.
Okay.
Knowing this elevates your experience in nature.
Nice. Is all that one sentence? Or maybe
Probably
two or
not
three?
grammatically, but the way
That's
I
okay.
wrote it, it's got one period.
All right. All right. We'll go with it. Yeah. That's a pretty strong first effort. Cool.
So I kind of cheated because I used essays I've already written.
That's fine.
Topics, but there are things I chose, so I was interested. So the first one is, how has White Oak influenced beer taste in recent history?
How has White Oak influenced beer taste in recent history? Okay. Yeah.
Did how the land use history of the Mississippi Delta influenced? Oh wait, sorry. How the land use history of the Mississippi Delta influence on Delta blues shaped the music we enjoy today?
Well, all right. One more time on that one.
Sorry.
Yeah.
How the land use history of the Mississippi Delta's influence on Delta blues shaped the music we enjoy today?
Okay. So it's kind of a three-stage one. Yeah. Okay. Got it.
And then the last one, I don't really necessarily even agree with this, but I've said historical conditions are an impractical guide for management objectives.
Historical conditions are an impractical guide for management prescriptions. All right. Yeah. Okay. See where you're going with all three of those. Yeah. Cool.
So my topic was crochet, and then I broke that down into the fibers you use to crochet with.
Yeah.
So my theme was our use of synthetic fibers fuels microplastic pollution.
Fuels it. Man, that's a good verb. All right.
I said, what is the importance of knowing how to perform a water rescue?
What is the importance of knowing how to perform a water rescue? Okay, cool. All right, and for folks who's joining us today, the assignment was to write 3 one-sentence theme statements that check about 6 or 8 specific boxes as far as characteristics of that one sentence. So we recorded Wednesday's class session. I'll put that on the course website for you. You can check into that when you have a chance. Once it's uploaded. It takes a second to get all that stuff set up. Okay, so from here what we want to do is now continue practicing writing theme statements, and I'll scaffold that all throughout the semester. But from here we want to sort of widen out the focus to the rest of the introduction and indeed the rest of the interpretive content. Again, whether that's staffed or not staffed, you might never see the literally millions of people that you're interpreting to if it's through a pamphlet or a book or an annotated map. There's lots of different formats. An electronic video game is a powerful venue for environmental interpretation and so forth. So, we kind of spent some time on Wednesday talking a lot about how all of that other stuff, the rest of the introduction, and indeed the rest of the content, really has to flow from a carefully crafted theme statement. And without that carefully crafted theme statement, the rest of it can only sort of rise to the level or the bar set by that theme statement. So, weak theme statement, weak intern. There's just not really a great way to polish a turd, honestly. And if you have put some hard work, edited out typically a lot of what you wanted to say in that theme statement, withholding and saving some of it for the rest of the content, but also leaving some of it on the editing room floor, then the rest of the content has the ability to rise to that level of excellence as well. And that's typically reflected in the experiences of the people. Never want to say just consuming your intern. People don't just consume it like we would a TV show, you know. It's kind of lean back entertainment. Interpretation we kind of really want, kind of the whole point of it is to get that lean forward, that not just active participation, but involvement and even investment in what you are wrestling with, grappling about, exploring, getting excited about, whatever kind of the mood or the vibe of the intern is. Okay? So, in order to widen out our hard work on theme statements so far, we want to couch it as kind of the moral of the story. Let's talk for just kind of a quick minute about how you and I and everybody else, we're kind of story engines, if you want to think of it that way. If you ever have the good occasion to get involved in personal counseling or marriage counseling, for those of you who are the marrying kind, or crisis counseling for folks who've experienced some kind of trauma or something like that, you come to see pretty quickly that you and I and everybody else, we understand ourselves, we understand our personal histories, we understand the world around us through the tool or the lens of stories. And that's, on the one hand, kind of obvious, and on another, maybe from a different perspective, it's really non-obvious. So let's talk a little bit more about story and how we think about things. When scholars started to do what are called comparative religious studies, that is, taking the major and minor, there are many of them, world religions, and kind of lining them up next to each other and just seeing what looks about the same, seeing what looks wildly different or even unrecognizable from one to the next. They started to see some interesting patterns and continuities across them. By a show of hands, how many of you guys have ever heard the little factoid that most of the major world religions involve some kind of a catastrophic flood story at some point? Yeah, that's kind of a little bromide that's tossed around, folks just sort of casually discussing this stuff. That's interesting, you know? Whether the religion is, monotheistic, polytheistic, oligotheistic, whatever, there's some commonalities across them. Pretty much every major world religion tries to explain the why of the grand human experience. Why are things the way they are? Why do we need to do animal husbandry? Why do we need to grow crops to feed ourselves? Other species don't really see the need to do that, and they seem to get along more or less fine, depending on how you define fine, and so forth. But, the Abrahamic religions talk about the Garden of Eden, and everything was kind of hunky-dory for a while as we were eating fruit or food produced by the trees of the garden and stuff like that, and then something Adam and Eve and a snake, and blame shifting, and all of a sudden we have to work by the sweat of our brow, and so forth. And other religions, Buddhism, Shinto, etc., outside of the Abrahamic three, they all wrestle with this as well. This idea of nirvana. It's not just the 90s Seattle, early grunge band. It's this sense of freedom from attachment to things here. Kind of vaulting over the question of farming and more of a, what is the nature of pain kind of a thing. So religions, in one sense, are kind of about explaining, about putting some kind of recognizable order or sense to what can feel like the utter chaos of things. And so environmental interpretation is kind of synoptic, or looking in the same direction as this idea of the world's major religions. Now, we're not necessarily interested in talking about so-called creation myth, sort of the explanatory story of how things came from the great primordial soup, or the darkness over the deep, or how the world, came to be on the back of the great turtle or on the branches of the world tree grassil or whatever. But we are trying to help not tell people what the answers are, but explore some of these questions or questions like it together with folks. Why does oak affect the way beer tastes? Maybe I hadn't really thought about that. Maybe you see that as a pretty important question, maybe not. Maybe thinking about Swiftwater Rescue or anything else, some folks among your participants are going to feel pretty strongly invested in that, or at least curious about it. And so if you're curious about something and you have sort of an internal motivation to learn a little bit more about it to satisfy your own curiosity, or to skill up professionally, right? So, using wood as a product for things like oaken barrels, in bourbon making or beer or whatever. If you find value in learning about and exploring this stuff, the sure bet is that lots of other people find some value in it too. But almost all of them haven't had your particular combination of background, education, cultural influences, your individual characteristics and so forth as well, that brought you to the place where you can capably investigate that. You're here in a top-ranked forestry program in the country, in a top-ranked country around the world for forestry, to be able to dig a little bit deeper on oakiness in brewing and fermenting. And that's an opportunity that, quite frankly, most people will never have. So you are a story engine for other people, or a story engine on folks' behalf. Through you, they get to delve deeper into the why and what's important about, and why should I care, and is this some kind of an interesting thing? Is it a crucial safety and survival skill if the Russian Federation ever decides to deploy EMPs over us? We can avoid some waterborne illnesses by all learning how to make beer, right? It's one of the major life-saving innovations of the early last millennium. You can couch it in those terms. So all of this to say, Interp is about story. And a theme is typically the moral to that story. So when you're thinking about putting something together, and if you're not ever sure why or how to select kind of an angle on something, go for the why is this important angle. Help folks understand with the title. Sometimes the theme is presented as the title, or the first sentence that folks read or whatever, necessarily as kind of a hook to pull people in, to help them understand, oh, I would like to know more about that. I didn't realize that I was curious about this. I think I could spend a pretty cool afternoon by the fireside, my favorite dog, by my feet, whatever, reading this book on beer brewing or whatever, as a form of historic interpretation. Okay? So, take these themes and take another look at them as the moral of the story. That is, what's the nugget of wisdom? What's the why should we care? And you don't have to answer that question, but we do want to at least pose the question of why is it important that oaks and the chemistry of the wood of oaks, or maybe the allelopathy around the roots of eucalyptus trees, changes the character of the barley or the hops grown nearby used in beer, stuff like that. How does this help people understand their world a little bit more? How does this help people understand themselves a little bit more, right? So it's never just about the topic. We spent a bunch of time last Wednesday talking about it's never just that noun phrase topic. It is so much more. It's the provocation or the invitation. It's the attribution, helping somebody understand that they have some role or relationship or placement near this story that this interpretation is all about. They might have a role in it and not know that role yet. If the interpretation is speaking to them and about them in some way. It's a very common thing with historic and cultural interpretation. Okay? So, take another look at your theme statements. And just take a moment to reflect, maybe write a couple of notes to yourself in the margin on how might this topic be important to somebody? Another way to answer that is, why might somebody else be curious about this because I'm curious about it? Is this at all interesting to anybody else? And if you picked a super geeky niche topic, that's fine. Because in today's world, it doesn't matter how long tail or super it's so obscure you probably haven't heard of it. Sort of that hipster vibe from the early aughts. There's somebody else out there that's kind of in that space, and they could be interested in it. And because you and I are story engines, we are story understanding creatures, just like everybody else, even if somebody doesn't see direct representation of themselves in that spot, in that story, in that content area, in that topic, there's a way to help them understand, hey, this isn't just for the 5 people around the world that understand what this is. This is for all of us, because whatever, not this thing is, but what it represents or what it can represent, that matters to all of us. Interp is about finding the bigger truth beyond the specific topic. Okay? Cool. So, that's sort of lofty language. It's a little bit vague. Let's take a second to just reflect on the topics and the themes that you've chosen for this exercise. So, good thing to do would just be to pull out a sheet of paper, list 3 topics, and we'll build those into theme statements for you, or with you. And just reflect, how is this potentially important to anybody else? You don't have to impress me with this. You're sincerely pondering, maybe for the first time, what's important about this? What justifies me spending some effort on putting together communication about this topic and exploring it in meaningful detail with people in a way that draws them in? Why should somebody else care? Again, this is just notes to yourself. It's not an essay question. It's not a quiz. This is just reflective time. So leave several lines, 6, 8, 10 lines between each of your 3 topics. Rough them in from there. So, just kind of the quick refresh on building a theme out of a topic is theme is the most important statement. Russell thinks it's the reason for existence of the inter. And it takes just a phrase or a single word of a topic. It's usually pretty general and broad. You can talk about a million different things like around that or different angles on it. It kind of narrows it down to one more specific, explicit thing. So, theme will be a complete sentence. With an action verb. Usually has attributional language. You, me, us, we, our, your. Take some perspective. So that's the interpretation part. Make some kind of a value judgment of importance or something like that. Is punctuated. Meaning you can phrase it as a question, a statement, an exclamation, etc. And it has some kind of a direct object, the verb is being done to, or indirect object, the thing that is being verbed to the direct object, and so forth. Okay, so take your general topic, pick sort of a more specific subtopic inside of that, widen it out to a longer phrase, and then kind of take an angle on that more specific topic, that perspective. All right? And just take a couple minutes to write one sentence for each of your 3 chosen topics. And it's just a first draft. You're not going to get graded on grammar and stuff like that. It's not a big deal. Okay, so just so that your classmates and I can begin to understand kind of how you're thinking about your particular chosen topics and the themes that are growing out of them. Let's go back around the room again. We'll go in reverse order this time, and let's introduce yourself so we get more practice with that, and tell us just what the 2-3 word topic is. Read us the sentence, your current draft 1 theme statement, and then let us know some of those notes or thoughts about, why did I choose this? Why do I think this is important? Why do I think this could be, around this particular theme, could be really beneficial and a genuinely good thing for people to participate in, to engage with, to explore, to be confronted by if it's something a little bit less comfortable, right? That's okay. Just gonna let us know where you're at. All right, so start with you.
Hi everyone, my name is Kylie. The topic I chose is community. And so to go a little bit deeper into that, I proposed the question of why is it important to know how to perform a water rescue? And I think that people would care about this because it can potentially save their life, or they can save the life of somebody else if they're out on the water.
Okay. I would venture to guess that most of us, not everybody, but most of us know or have a family member or a family member of a friend or acquaintance who drowned in the backyard pool or drowned in the ocean because of a riptide or something like that. Safety of human life, that's pretty important, right? It's one of the basic fundamental tenets of society and law and order and all of that. So Kylie's got a pretty good entree into this. When we pose basic existential threat kind of questions, or what can we do in the face of such a thing, people generally kind of pay attention to that. Okay, we'll talk about why, thanks to a psychological phenomenon called labeling a little bit later on in the semester. Nice workout. All right.
My name's Olivia Larison. My topic was synthetic fibers, and then I talked about how our use of synthetic fibers fuels microplastic pollution. And that's very important because microplastics are basically everywhere because we just keep making more and more plastic. And then it gets into like our soil and our air and our ocean, and we're breathing them in, and like the fish are eating them in the ocean, and then when you eat them, you're eating the plastic. And humans now eat like a credit card worth of plastic every week. That's pretty damaging to our health.
Yeah, about 5 grams of plastic you ingest a week. That's like almost a paperclip worth a day in mass, right? And paper clips are metal, so they're a lot more dense, so it's be a lot more plastic than a paperclip worth, if that makes sense. Okay? So, we've started finding nanoplastics inside the blood-brain barrier. It's really hard to treat illnesses that originate in your brain tissue because your body has a totally separate, privileged blood supply for your brain. And protecting that is the blood-brain barrier. So the few organisms that can get across that, like the, was it Naegleria fowleri, the brain-eating amoeba that gets into your sinuses down from freshwater sources in like Louisiana and stuff like that, and then eats its way into your brain. You can't fix that because you can't really get anti-amoeba drugs into the brain without like drilling a physical hole into the brain and pumping that stuff straight in, and sometimes the treatment is worse than the cure or the disease. So anything that can do that, and plastics are now shown to be doing that, we're running a grand experiment on all of humankind, on you and me. And if that doesn't either make you pucker a little bit or make you a little bit mad, you're completely dead in your soul right now. All right, moving on. Next up.
Hi everybody, I'm Dylan. Topic I started with is history of wood use in brewing, and then I landed on how white oak influenced beer tastes we enjoy. And I think stuff like this is interesting to me because I think probably a lot of people like beer and they care about land use history, you know. But I think you can find kind of like the product is popular and kind of like an inroad into talking to people about other stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So even for somebody who, let's say, doesn't prefer alcohol or doesn't sort of get the whole like microbrew scene, they're never going to be out at Scratch Brewery trying out like microbrewed basil-based or mushroom-based beers. That's okay, because really maybe ultimately what we're not talking about is like the chemical engineering processes or the microbiology of beer fermentation. Like that's interesting, and it's a really cool field. We just got a whole new major added, right, for it here at SIU, fermentation science. But maybe it's more about this is a common thing across humanity, and beer in particular is common across humanity, or at least Western cultures, for about the last 50 generations. Like I have pretty good family history records that go back all the way, believe it or not, to the 1600s back in Germany. Back when they used to record the whole family tree by hand, in like the family Bible passed down through generations because paper was expensive or something, or few people could read or whatever. Germans keep good records, no? And so, yeah, we can talk about beer, but it's for some people, it's going to spark other associations. Like maybe they have a family member who's a beer aficionado or has tried home brewing or something like that. And so you're talking about beer, but they're thinking about family. Does that make sense? And as we know from Fast and Furious franchise, it's all about family. Okay? So we are story engines. We bring in a lot of associations, and you learn about new things like specifics of oak tannins maybe as they relate to beer fermentation and taste and mouthfeel and all that stuff. We assimilate that new information by locating it against what we already know. This is something called cognitive map theory, and it makes a lot of sense with the physical neuroscience of the brain, although we're not totally sure about how memory is physically formed? Is it represented as a protein in the brain or a map of synaptic connections? Who knows? We're working on that. But the point is, when you say beer, I think history and family and monks figuring out how to brew beer. And think back to when I watched the old Band of Brothers miniseries, if any of you guys have seen that, with my neighbor whose dad was a World War II bomber pilot shot down over Germany. And like we saw the area in that World War II miniseries that his father had to like walk through a field and get captured, and he was a German prisoner of war for a while. And that association exists for me because in the course of watching that miniseries with him, I tracked down a microbrew beer that's made in one of the villages that's shown in that miniseries that an important battle was fought around. And I got a 4-pack of it, and we had that beer, right? So it's not just about the biochemistry of oaks. It's about whatever we remember or have experienced around it already and connecting with that. Finding out what your interpretees, if you want to call them that, what they're bringing to the experience and seeing where there's a connection. And in doing that, you can make things a lot more approachable. If somebody is pretty intimidated by thinking about the science of forestry, the science of beer making and stuff like that sounds like something that's above my pay grade, sort of a sentiment, well then, you can come at it from the family angle, or the World War II angle, or the monks angle, or the whatever else. There's a million different associations possible with any of these topics, right? So that's a pretty cool thing, and that works in your favor. We want to lean into using those approaches, seeing what else connects to it and what specific associations your participants bring in so that you can meet them there. Okay?
What's the best way to gauge that through just questions and conversation? Or
Yeah.
do you anticipate a little bit of it as well?
Both. That's a both and, 100%. So you anticipate as much as you can. Of course, you can't anticipate everything. You just don't know everything about everybody. And by and large, you're generally interpreting to strangers. Or at least they're strangers initially, right? Maybe you come away from that experience, with a real and meaningful sense of who people are. They're no longer strangers. But one of the most satisfying parts of Interp is establishing that connection and sort of setting up the dynamic of the space so that it's not like a college lecture where some dork is talking at you for 50 minutes, but it's a conversation, So where are you guys coming from? What is your interest in this particular topic? Oh, your so-and-so was your favorite dead uncle was a forester, and he was always talking about oaks, and he liked beer, and so on and so forth, right? So, okay, that's what brings you here today, so let's talk more about that. And then you steer the conversation, for that next hour, a little bit more in that direction so that the connections are clearer and easier for that set of folks to make. And we'll talk about how those conversations, those questions, are very specifically not scripted. We don't read scripts. That's inauthentic. But it is built into that outline, that 5-part outline we were talking about last week. Absolutely a part of the introduction. And the after action section is typically a huge chunk of time for question and answer, because inevitably somebody's going to have just a burning question or a cool story that they thought of halfway through, and they're just dancing on foot to foot, and you're not sure if they need to go to the bathroom, if they have something cool to say, and they finally get the chance to approach you about it afterwards. So before and after, and in some cases where it's appropriate, during. But you don't want a session to run away on a rabbit trail for one particular family, and you've got 80 other families just kind of standing there staring at you while you're engaging with this one. So we'll talk about how to manage that in some detail a little bit later on. Okay, good question. Yeah. Ready to go? Rock on.
So my topic is, hello, I'm Evan. My topic is how to make a PowerPoint that best suits a diverse audience. Learning to make a well-structured PowerPoint empowers you to break communicative barriers.
Okay, sounds good.
And then, why is that important? It's a pet peeve of mine personally, bad PowerPoints. As an audience member, your brain shuts off really quickly if you're looking at something that is visually not appealing, and it cuts into the credibility of you as the speaker, despite the fact that you might know exactly what you're talking about. You just have a really ugly PowerPoint.
Is that fair? That somebody would judge you on a sloppy PowerPoint and be like, well, this guy or gal's got a lot of letters after their name, they must be smart, but clearly not that smart because they're kind of PowerPoint impaired. Is that fair? No. Does it happen? Continuously, right? We are, in addition to being story engines, we are contrast resolution engines. We are trying to see differences. Our brains are constantly trying to figure out what is grouped together and what is separated from it. And one way that we do that is sorting on quality, technique, skill level. Okay, cool. So, have any of you guys ever had, be honest, a professor who was pretty awful at PowerPoints and you were kind of harmed a little bit by that? Like you're never going to get that class session or sessions or semester back? Yeah, me too, right? That's fair, that's honest, that's real. So that's a shared experience that we can hook into that, right? And we can lead with a question like that. How many of you guys and gals have ever been in a meeting or a class and experienced death by PowerPoint, but you lived to tell the tale? Inject a little bit of humor into it. All right. Cool, nice work. All right, next up.
Hi everyone, I'm Jacob. And so my main topic was climbing, and so I thought it'd be interesting to explore how climbing outdoors can improve your mental health. And I figured it'd be interesting to some people because maybe you're just looking to improve your health in some way, or you could just be wanting to try something new outside.
Okay.
Or both.
How many of you guys and gals have ever climbed before? Like rock wall, sport climbing, crag climbing, bouldering, any kind of climbing? Show of hands. Okay, most everybody, but not everybody, and that's all right, because this isn't just about climbing, right? It's also about mental health, and everybody with the brain has mental health, and most of us have some mental health frustrations or concerns, or at least considerations, right? As it turns out, our one-size-fits-all society doesn't do a great job with anybody who is at all neurodiverse, or doesn't do a great job in some respects with anybody who has experienced trauma. So, yeah, you have something to say to everybody in the room, whether or not they realize it yet. So that's awesome. It's a very inclusive and welcoming thing. All right, cool. So it is about time for a quick break. Go ahead and stretch your legs if you'd like to. Use the restroom. Get some water. Refill the electrolytic organ that is your brain. We'll come back in about 2 minutes and get after it. Apologize for this decent amount of glare even with these glare reduction shades here, but you can all see the screen here. We're going to get into just a quick it'll take a couple minutes to watch the whole thing. It's almost 12 minutes long. This is a recorded or edited down interp hike at Yosemite National Park given by a guy named Shelton Johnson about 15 years ago. And the idea here is, we'll see the content and stuff like that, and he does a really pretty good job. This is the guy that won the Best Interpreter in the World award a couple of years ago. But what we're looking for here is not so much the content of it. It's really, really interesting, and it's an awesome topic. It'll help us understand why that is. But we're more looking at him as the interpreter, as the professional, and how he takes a pretty interesting, but also potentially sort of fraught, or for some people kind of a loaded topic, African American soldiers serving early in the life of Yosemite National Park before there was a United States National Park Service. Yosemite was around for a couple of decades before the Park Service was created, believe it or not. And he brings us into that space by an amazing, amazing theme statement. All right, so listen to this whole thing straight through. See if you can pick out where his theme statement is. And it's not always immediately easy to see as you're hearing it, but in retrospective, as you get through the whole thing, think back towards the beginning and see if you can pick out which statement is the theme of his hike. It's intercut with how he made it as well, since this is out of a documentary, but you'll get the idea pretty quick. Here we go. Please stop.
Most people's experience of a park is a park like the city park, the county park. The Yosemite is completely different. It's an entire world. It has its own mountain ranges, its own wildlife. It's a window into the ancient earth, the earth that once was, the earth that will always be. Park is not a strong enough term to describe what's beyond this gate. I don't know where you folks want. We could go for a little walk, or I could just talk to you right here. How many of you are too comfortable to move? I'm not going to walk that far. Now, my name is Sergeant Elise Bowman, and what I was hoping to do is talk to you about Yosemite, which seems a good topic, and about why there are colored soldiers in Yosemite. How's that sound? Now, I don't want to start walking down that path and get out there, and there's no one behind me, because then you're going to see a soldier start to cry. So you really with me? Okay, then follow me. All right. I can't really say that I'm portraying a real person. I am embodying a real name. The name Elise Bowman is on the muster rolls, which is a listing of all the soldiers who served in Yosemite in the 9th Cavalry. So I made Elise Bowman a composite figure to stand for the 400 to 500 other soldiers, these African-American soldiers, who served alongside of you. Come on up, get closer. Folks, could you come on up, get closer, Steve? No, come on closer. Could you come on up, please? Could you come on up? You're too far away. Why are you being way back there? Just come on up. I won't be honest with you. I didn't know much about Yosemite when I got here. We got the word at the Presidio of San Francisco that we were going to be protecting Yosemite National Park all summer long. This is the summer, the last year, 1903. We had no idea what Yosemite was. All we knew, it was something called a national park. We had no idea if this was going to be good duty or bad duty. Show me your hands right now. How many folks think this is good duty? You get assigned to Yosemite. How many of you think about enlisting yourself if this is your duty right here? When we were riding through the Lombard Gate of the Presidio San Francisco, there was a sentry, and he was looking down at us as we were riding through. And just as I got close to him, he said, "It just ain't fair. These niggers are going up to Yosemite. This is a white man's job. What's this army coming to?" It was then and there that I realized that this was good duty. Because if that sentry wanted to be in Yosemite, maybe he needed to be there too. When I came here 15 years ago, I had no idea that African American soldiers had anything to do with the national parks. And then I saw the photograph of the 24th Infantry, taken in 1899, sitting on a table in Yosemite's research library. This right here is the image that changed my life. So this is the earliest shot of African Americans here in Yosemite National Park in an official capacity. These were park protectors, park rangers before the term was even coined. Those were the Buffalo Soldiers. And when I saw this image, my heart just sort of went, what's that? They called me a Buffalo Soldier, and I got that name because the Indians we were fighting in the Indian Wars, they saw the hair of these soldiers in the 9th Cavalry and the 10th Cavalry, and they saw that their hair was just like the hair between the horns of the buffalo. So they started calling them Buffalo Soldiers out of respect. It sounds a whole lot better than Native Cavalry. The Buffalo Soldiers fought Native peoples. The Buffalo Soldiers fought the insurrectos in the Philippines. The Buffalo Soldiers fought the Spanish in the Spanish-American War in Cuba. But the battlefield that was rarely mentioned was the battlefield of race.
Tomorrow we're going to get on a bus and we're taking this road that crosses the entire park.
African Americans, their visitation is less than 1% of the visitation to Yosemite.
The second day we're going to do a day hike, the Southern Cloud Rest. We'll fully try our best.
When I saw that image, I saw the bridge that would tie wilderness to the African American community right there in the faces and in the eyes of those dead soldiers who were looking at me from across a distance of 100 years. And I knew in the instant that I saw that I was looking at the most significant thing that I had to do in my career as a park ranger. This is one of the Buffalo Soldier regiments that served in the West. I don't know these guys. I'm not related to these guys. Okay, I'm going to have to break this to you. I'm African American. And I'm a park ranger. And there aren't a lot of African American park rangers. In Yosemite, there's me, then there's me, and there's also me. Buffalo Soldiers were African American Army regiments that served in the West, fighting in the Indian Wars, but they also served here in Yosemite. So I'm protecting Yosemite, they were protecting Yosemite, I'm wearing a uniform, they're wearing a uniform. So you tell me, young man, how excited was I?
Extremely exciting.
Oh yeah, I was extremely excited. There were African American soldiers who were part of the Western frontier, who were part of that whole mythology. In 1903, Charles Young, the third African American to graduate from West Point, was the acting military superintendent of Sequoia National Park. He's one of my heroes. You know, when this was happening, there were only parks in Yellowstone, Sequoia, and Mount Rainier. The idea of parks was such a new thing that people behaved inappropriately. They saw something on the ground they wanted, they pick it up and they walk out with it. The mindset was, trees are good for building towns. You know, wildlife is good for feeding your family. There's a utilitarian purpose to the land. It's there for us. The frontier was declared closed around 1890, and now we're saying, protect the earth, protect the land. So to say that beauty is also there for us, it's a whole new thing. Very few African Americans were in any position of authority in 1903 and 1904. there were still people around who had been the enslavers and the enslaved. It was still living memory. And so they're here telling people what they could and could not do to people who were not used to being questioned at all by African Americans. And when you consider that in 1903, 1904, an African American was being lynched on a daily basis in the South, and that African Americans occupied one of the lowest rungs of the social ladder. I mean, it's a pretty amazing thing that they were doing, what they were doing. These folks come closer. How many folks knew when I stopped right here, you said to yourself, well, that soldier stopping us right here, shaving the culture. You see my nose right here? This is an oak tree. This is a California black oak. And a California black oak produces an acorn. Look right here. Let me show you something. Here's an acorn. And the ground squirrels and the gray squirrels eat that acorn. But the Indians eat the acorn as well. And when you look at that tree, you can recognize that tree. You look around and you see that there are other trees just like it, right there, and right there, and right there. And you realize that we are not just in a valley. We are in a culture. And this is the crop of that culture. And you're looking at something that is rooted here, and a culture that is rooted and intertwined with those roots of this plant. In 1904, the Buffalo Soldiers here in Yosemite built what is considered to be the first museum in the national park system. It was an arboretum near the South Fork of the Merced. In 1903, the 9th Cavalry in Sequoia National Park built the first usable wagon road into Giant Forest. Also, in 1903, the Buffalo Soldiers in Sequoia built the first trail to the top of Mount Whitney, which in those days was the highest mountain in the United States. If that's not worthy of being remembered, I don't know what it is. There's nothing more democratic than a national park. You are going into a wonderland. You are going into a different world. And doesn't everyone deserve the right to experience what it must have felt like to be in a place that no one has ever been before? We can all have that experience on any trail in any national park. So why should only part of the population have that sense of wonder and that experience of discovery? Why can't African Americans and Latinos and Asian Americans and everybody have that experience? Because that is part of the experience of being an American. It belongs to everyone.
So, that's one example of, in this case, mostly historic and a little bit of cultural interpretation. So, can you see how he was using the tools that we've had a chance to talk about so far? Like, he was trying to not club everybody over the head with a whole bunch of facts about oak trees or Buffalo Soldiers or anything like that. It was more kind of, in this case, literally physically walking with folks through some of these topic areas and helping them understand what's any sense of connection here. Use the word bridge, right? From these dead soldiers to people of today. Connecting a sense of, use the word Indians. This was living history interpretation. So he was speaking through the vocabulary of a historic character, Elise Bowman. These days we'd say, First Nations or Native Americans or name the specific tribes present or whatever. But we don't back down from talking about those tribes. We maybe organize the opportunity for members of those tribes to participate and help lead the interpretation as well, to tell their story firsthand or tell their stories firsthand. And sometimes those aren't pretty stories. But did you guys get any sense of what a theme for that might have been? And you don't have to remember it, word for word or anything, but he gave us a couple of pretty cool statements. Any thoughts?
I don't think I could put it into like a neat theme sentence or anything, but
Sure.
I just liked that it felt like he was like letting us in on a secret, so to speak. It was kind of like people have forgotten this, so I'm gonna kind of pull that back from the past and present you some unique information that you probably wouldn't find elsewhere.
Yeah. Did he help give us any sense of importance? Like he relayed some facts, you know, Sergeant Elise Bowman, etc., Presidio, so on and so forth. How did he help us know that this was not going to be a dry recitation of facts? How did he help us understand this is more of a values conversation? What's important out of this facts? What's the wisdom out of it? What's the shared human experience out of those factoids? Any sense of how he did that? Because that's where we're going next, or throughout the semester, right? All the different techniques of how to help communicate importance or insight. Are there any ways that he did that? What did you see?
I don't think it was around one specific thing. Like he talked about culture, but he also talked about how the land was actually used and like who used it and
Yeah.
stuff like that,
Mm-hmm.
and how diverse the area actually was,
Mm-hmm.
and not just in people and everything.
Yeah, it was a pretty multi-perspective thing. And we only saw a couple of the stops on that hike. In reality, that's a much longer hike with several stops, and each with a different sort of more specific topic inside of his general sense of trying to help folks understand Buffalo Soldiers and the cultures that were already present at Yosemite when it was turned into a park. He did a couple of somatic things, so working with the bodies, so to speak, of his participants. You saw when he was like, all right, come a little closer. Well, come a little closer. I don't bite. Come a little closer. And you could hear people kind of laughing or giggling a little bit, like he's intentionally being a little bit silly to get everybody out of that, okay, he's talking, I'm going to docilely walk behind him as he goes from spot to spot and stand there and just be quiet and just sort of passively absorb, right? He's, without saying it, he's inviting people to be a little bit interactive. It's okay to laugh during this. It's okay to answer my questions. They're not just rhetorical questions. Rhetorical questions are valid, but nobody opens their mouth after a rhetorical question because it's understood this is not a question to be answered, it's a question to provoke a thought. He did some other things as well. He used the N-word. And you could hear a little bit of vocalization throughout the crowd when he dropped the N-bomb the first time, right? And that's another way of signaling, hey, this is not a lecture. You know, we're talking about stuff that some of it's not pretty, but we aren't going to back down from that. We're going to be real for the next hour, hour and a half, 2 hours, however long the hike is. And we're going to confront some stuff. We're going to do it in a safe way. We're not going to let anybody feel attacked here today, but we need to talk about some things in terms of how they actually were and not really whitewash it, you know? So he did a lot of other techniques throughout. Some of them are pretty quick and subtle, and some of them are pretty straightforward in terms of things like using metaphor, using sense of scale and time for the park that is, the park that always has been and will always be. Park is not a strong enough word for what's beyond these gates, right? It's a beautiful metaphor. And it helps folks understand, okay, there's a little bit of human expression in what we're talking about. We're going to talk about big time scales, you know, thousands of years of Native American occupation and use of that area up through post-Civil War and modern day. And then, you know, we get to talking about some modern day issues. Like a quarter or more of our population is African American, or at least partially African American. And out of Yosemite has over 1,000 federal employees, not all of whom are rangers, but at that time he was the only African American ranger. That's way, way, way not in proportion with the broader U.S. population. So what that can do is it can lead to folks in any minority group, not just African American, they can feel genuinely less safe. They tend to show up less because they think they're not going to be represented. In some studies, some just heart-wrenching studies in the early aughts, some of my colleagues, one of whom is a gal named Rebecca, they found that African Americans, by and large, don't go to national parks for like family vacations and stuff like that, in part because they genuinely don't feel physically safe at them. And parks are extremely safe, statistically, right? There's just an extremely low murder rate across the United States National Park system. In fact, the entire national park system has an equivalent murder rate to the city of Carbondale on an annualized basis. It's just as dangerous to live in Carbondale as it is to live in all of the national parks simultaneously, if that's even possible. It's not. Okay? And the national park system gets over 300 million visit days a year. Carbondale, not that many. Okay? So the perception of it, though, national parks are full of woods. And a lot of African American families have in their personal family history lynchings that often happen in the South and in the woods at that time. So that memory remains. That effect on people visiting parks remains, and that's a real concern. Like, that's affecting people's lives, not to feel safe going to these amazing places all across our country. Like, people might be missing out, and for a valid reason, but one that can be overcome, by helping folks understand our national parks are not woods where lynching is happening. That's just not a thing these days. Why don't you come and connect with your parks? They are yours as well as the parks of the white man and so forth. Okay? So, he uses a lot of techniques to broach some uncomfortable topics because they're topics that touch all of us, right? All of us need food. And so understanding how Yosemite-affiliated Native American tribes and nations use things like black oak acorns for food, like going to the supermarket, that helps us have a connection not just with Yosemite, not just with that oak tree species, but also with those peoples. Oh yeah, they need food too, right? Sometimes people just really haven't thought about other people in those terms, and it helps build a sense of connection and can lead to meaningful open dialogues. Later in the semester, we'll look at another such video on American concentration camps run during World War II that weren't execution camps, but they were absolutely concentration camps used to sequester mostly Japanese Americans and some German Americans, stuff like that. And that's a part of our history that most of us don't get in high school history class these days. But the Park Service is now, in its historic interpretation section, wrestling with some of those issues, right? So the parts of our story that aren't really pretty anymore, maybe they never were, they're still just as important. Maybe they're more important than the sort of neatly tied with a bow, go America, American exceptionalism kinds of stories that sometimes we get fed at different levels. So, we'll get into that stuff. Let's end a couple of minutes early. No homework assignment for today. And we'll come back on Wednesday, and we'll look to move beyond our theme statement, now that we've got this pretty well explored, into the larger introduction around it, pregame before that, and then the content and after action beyond this as well. We'll start filling in some of the content details now that we've got a good direction with some of these examples that you got. Okay? Cool. All right. See you on Wednesday. Come around for questions if you have them.